I believe we have everyone that we're expecting at this point in time, so we'll call the meeting to order at 2 p.m. right on time. A couple of housekeeping matters. The recording from this meeting will be posted on YouTube tomorrow. We keep hoping we're going to be back in person. Every month we monitor whether or not we think we'll be able to meet back in person. We'll see. I'm not super optimistic about February, but obviously the minute it's safe to meet in person, I think that's probably all of our preferences. So we will do that and we will let everyone know when we're back to those in-person meetings. But for now, I would anticipate likely February will continue to be virtual, but we'll keep everyone informed. So we have our newest board member here. Megan Walker was sworn in on January 4th. Welcome, Megan. She has been participating since the beginning of the day. Ali's only been here for his second meeting, so we have two very new members, and I'm very happy to report that both have been very actively involved, very engaged, very well prepared. So it is making all of our lives much easier to have a full complement of very smart, engaged board members. So again, welcome, Megan, to your first public meeting. Any disclosures of interest? Seeing none, I'll move right along. The minutes of the December 16th, 2021 meeting, can I get somebody to move those minutes? Moved by Maureen, seconded by Ali. All in favor? And that is carried. The first major item on our agenda is the election of the chair and vice chair, as well as a membership in our two committees. As you might be aware, the Police Services Board has two subcommittees, a governance committee and a finance committee. So we will be putting all of that on the agenda today in terms of choosing them, as well as choosing the chairs of those committees. The committees themselves choose the vice chair, so we will leave the vice chair for the committees for those committees to vote on at their next meeting. But for now, we will be electing the chair, the vice chair position, and that's required by the Police Services Act, and then membership in the committees and the chair of those committees. So hopefully I kept track of all of that. And I believe at this point, we're quite lucky that there was some pretty clear desires by different board members, and so I'm happy to announce and then put this forward as a motion that I will be seeking the chair role for another year. Mr. Ali Chabar has put his name forward for the vice chair role. In terms of memberships in the committee, the governance committee will be, well, assuming this motion moves and seconds and is carried, the governance committee will be Maureen Cassidy, Megan Walker, myself, and Ali Chabar, with Maureen Cassidy as chair of the governance committee. And then the makeup of the finance committee is proposed to be Mr. Jeff Lang, Jesse Helmer, and the mayor, and Jesse Helmer as the chair of the finance committee. So if that all makes sense, if I could get someone to move those positions, moved by the mayor, seconded by Jesse. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Maureen.
Just want to say, very happy you're staying in the chair role. You've done a very good job, and you were vice chair for a long time, which obviously helped you move into this role. And thank you to everyone putting their names forward, everybody participating in committees and doing the work together, and that lightens the load for everybody. So thank you, everybody.
Well said. Thank you. Any other discussion? So I'll call that to a vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you so much, and thank you for your confidence in me to continue in the chair role officially now rather than in an interim capacity. Next up, we have that's the speech. That's what you get. We have next public correspondence. There was a response, as you'll recall, we did write a letter to the Solicitor General's office just expressing our concerns that some essentially we'd be losing some source of money while we supported the Solicitor's General decision to make police record checks for volunteer organizations free. Absolutely support that. We did share some concerns about the lost revenue, and we did receive a response from the Solicitor General. So just looking for a mover to receive for informational purposes the response from the Solicitor General's office. Moved by Jesse, seconded by Maureen. Any discussion about that? Great. Call the vote. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you so much. That carries. Next up, we have the Problem-Oriented Policing Initiatives Adequacy Standards Report, and I believe it's Deputy Chief McIntyre who will be providing us with more information about that.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So this report is really just a snapshot for everyone to look at different problems in the community and then our efforts to solve those issues, much of which is all community driven. And it is about, at the end of the day, a high level, that community collaboration and working together to solve the problems and not have all of those problems fall to the police. But paramount in all of this is really research driven. It's using data to really inform what the police do, and very much proactive so that we try to prevent issues from happening even in the first place. So the report really spells out what really our core unit does, different efforts of community engagement. If specifically, if I brought you to the problem-oriented policing projects, amazing initiatives there led by our modernization team, really heavily supported by the core unit in 2021. Looked at where are the issues in the community, much of which are like property crimes, etc., issues in Old East. They're outlined there, issues around Western when the students were away. And then what do we do there? How can we look at those hotspots, if you will, and then deploy resources with the vision to prevent crimes from occurring in those areas? So amazing results. Those projects are laid out in the project plan. I won't reiterate them for you. But an interesting note, it really goes to show you the work of our core unit. And you know that mid-November, we had to redeploy those officers back to the front line just because of the crazy surging calls and the burnout that our officers on the front line were facing. And so that, you know, such a loss as our whole goal in policing is to move away from reactive models, right? It's not just to respond, it's to prevent. And you see outlined in this, I just wanted to highlight for you, of the huge cornerstone is the work of the core unit, those relationships, community building. The data is driven out of our analysts' work, it's driven out of our modernization team, but really that the people front and center that right now in our organization is the core unit. So I just wanted to highlight that to you because we're going to feel that impact as we move forward. It's not all or nothing, it's not all doom and gloom. We heavily rely on our auxiliary team, an amazing group of volunteers that are just tremendous, and we leverage their expertise and their visibility to be able to jump in and help. So, you know, I just share that with you. The city has been phenomenal, and the report just speaks to those community partnerships. So without reading it to you, that's my report, the recommendation that the board receive the report, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Any questions? Could I get somebody to move that we receive the Problem-Oriented Policing Initiatives Adequacy Standards Report? Moved by Jesse, seconded. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, not a question. I'm happy to move a receipt of the report. I just wanted to say a couple of these projects that happened in 2021 were responding to very local issues in the core and in Old East Village, and the prolific offender project in particular I thought was quite successful, and I wanted to commend the people who work in the community oriented response unit for all this work that they did over the course of the year and the year before. I think when you read over the report, you see a lot of what is being given up as we redeploy people to other roles, and you think about what 2022 is going to look like without that resource available to deal with these more sort of proactive approaches to specific problems, having that team available to work on those things and the way that they go about doing it. So I think I didn't have any questions about the report, but I really appreciate the work that this unit has done in the past. And the sooner we can get them back to those duties, I think the better, because this is the kind of police work that really pays off in the long run. Just the one line in the report that says, a lot of the people we worked on in prolific offenders ended up in housing. And that's a really good outcome, and it's just one line in a report that's covering a lot of things, but that's a really good outcome, and the kind of thing we need to see if we're going to really change the situation on the ground for policing and disorder and this kind of crime in the community. So really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jesse. Maureen?
Thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to second as well. And there's a comment in there about the core unit working closely with city councilors, and I'm one of the city councilors that my office is in touch very frequently with the core unit, and how valuable this work has been. Just like Jesse, it did lead to a question. Is there a plan, an exit strategy per se? Like what needs to happen to see the officers deployed back to where they are coming from to right now assisting with the front lines?
I'm not sure, Deputy Chief McIntyre or Chief Williams, if either of you can answer that.
Sure, I can take a stab at it. It's a great question, and I appreciate Councillor Helmer's comments. And I couldn't have said it better. I think people need to realize that the work the core unit is doing around prolific offenders, the evidence-based problem-oriented policing project, most other police services aren't doing this. So it's advanced, it's progressive, it's effective, it works. We're no longer doing it. That's a step backwards. And I said this in December or November. So to Councillor Cassidy's question, is our goal is to repopulate the core unit, and whatever that looks like with whatever the officer strength is and whatever their mandate is would be similar, obviously. But that really depends on frontline staffing. So we made these interim moves to basically stop the bleeding and to give our officers a break and to deliver better service to the community rather than waiting 4 or 7 days for calls for service. And you know the story. So we have officers who just arrived back from the Ontario Police College, 8 of them. They're in training right now. In a couple of months, they'll be flying solo, so a bit more independent, and they will help. We have another group of officers who are at the police college right now, and that'll assist as well. We also have a lot of retirements coming. So there's a 30-year bubble that is now. So people who were hired 30 years ago en masse are retiring. So that's in play. And also the trajectory we are on with calls for service over the last few years, the complexity, the weapons, the violence, the mental health. And, I've talked about this quite a bit in the past. These are time-consuming, complex investigations. They need to be done. And so going back to the question, we'll have to wait and see what the summer looks like. The summer is a huge pinch point. It actually starts in the spring. And if we don't have sufficient officers on the street in cruisers to answer the calls to an adequate level, the core unit will remain deployed on the street. If we can somehow get a handle on it with the additional resources and with some other things we're doing, then hopefully we can restore the core unit. But I have to be honest, I'm not hopeful that without additional resources that we will be able to stop the bleeding in any sustained way. So we talk about this every day between the senior management team, and we're always looking for efficiencies and ways we can do things differently, but we're efficient. We've got that covered. And we need to actually look at staffing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the chief for that that reality. I'm glad Jesse brought up the housing initiative as well, or the housing part of it, how people going through the prolific offender project had found housing, and I know from City Council that that the housing piece is a huge part of it. And, you know, when we've had case studies brought to council, we've seen the reduction in a specific individual's interactions with police just simply by being placed in permanent stable housing with support. Those individuals have a drastic reduction in their day-to-day interactions with police. So I as much as this is unfortunate right now what's happening, I think it's important that our goal be to repopulate this core unit and get back to this kind of policing, the community driven, the collaboration, the proactive, and working with other agencies. And I think the other agencies that are working on the parts that they're working on, it's really, really important, including City of London, that we continue to do the work that we need to do, and not let our end falter, because we have to get back to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the reality is that without additional resources and funding, the core unit will not be back in in the manner it was prior to being allocated to other areas. And that is, for me, a very serious issue. And I would encourage the board to look at this as a crisis. You know, when you have a police department that is known for being progressive and having really incredible programs, including the core unit, and then having to close that unit, it's a sign, it's a big red flag, it's the big elephant in the room. And for those of us who have worked in the community, many of us on this board, you know how significant those cuts are and the closure of those programs are. And it's interesting because, you know, Chief Williams spoke about the increase in criminal activity. And so that is also, so that's one area. Like we see like the guns and we see all of the trafficking and all of those sorts of issues, which is one very serious and significant issue, which could be defined as criminal activity. We then see a huge population of people with mental health issues or addiction issues or suffering significant trauma who are not criminals, but are being treated like criminals. And sometimes that's the only solution even those individuals have when they're freezing cold with no money and no food. Sometimes arrest or spending a night somewhere is a really good idea. And I was going back through my notes of dating back to, I think it was 1984, when we saw the provincial government decrease funding significantly to institutions, and everybody was really in favor of you know, closing institutions and deinstitutionalizing all of these areas. But it also came when we advocated to deinstitutionalize settings. We also said, but you need something to replace it. So we advocated with the provincial government of the day that what we needed was to make sure that anybody who was being released would still have access to a health card, still have access to medications, have access to safe housing and supports within their housing. And virtually none of those things existed. So what happened is we released people who were sick, who needed help, and let them fend for themselves. And for many of them, they could never follow up on, you know, getting drugs from the pharmacy because they didn't have, you know, access to the Ontario Works card and things of that nature. And some of those people that I talk to now, some of the very people that existed, you know, 1985 are the very people with the same circumstances that I'm talking to when I walk through downtown, as an example. And none of that, what we need is money. It's not, nobody has a magic wand. Nobody is going to make this go away. And in the absence of money, we are going to continue to see programs and units at police services cut, and they won't come back because it's once they're gone, they're really gone. We have to accept that. And I think, it's not enough to say, well, there's competing needs for funding. We know that, but where are we going to start? And if we can't start from a position of keeping our most vulnerable population safe and secure, then we're not keeping anybody safe and secure. And so this has been a long-standing issue. I mean, police chief after police chief came forward and tried to justify asking for more money by indicating that, well, like we're compared to other municipalities, we have really decent budgets and far less than others. But I don't think that was a good strategy, because now we are here today. And I know Chief Williams indicated in one of his reports that if additional funding was needed, that he might have to come back in December. Well, December's too late. How many more people are going to suffer if we can't take action now? And so I think very seriously this board needs to consider inaction and what the outcome of that will be. And I would hope that the finance committee of the board will have an emergency meeting or a meeting with a quick turnaround with the chief and the administrative staff to take a really serious look at how much money is needed and what are our options to get it. So I feel that this is a very serious community issue, and one that needs to be addressed on an emergency basis.
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Thank goodness. Thank you. Yes, I was just saying thank you to Ms. Walker for her comments. Any other comments or discussion? This is a slightly unorthodox, but I did just want to quickly mention that Councillor Hamou is with us today and had sent a message to our board administrator, just wanting to commend the core unit and looking forward to have them back, and thanking them for their hard work. So I thought I would mention that on behalf of Ms. Hamou as well. Thank you, Councillor Hamou, for passing that message along. I'm sure it's much welcome. Jeff, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Chief Williams. Chief, I know the core unit was a loss, and I supported your move to shore up frontline resources. And although I don't like the idea of a step backwards. I've looked at the numbers as well with regards to attrition, and I don't see this getting any better. As a matter of fact, if we come out of this pandemic and things open up, I shouldn't say if, when we come out of the pandemic and things open up, those pressures are going to increase again. And my concern is we're going to lose other core programs. Right now, from what I understand, we're doing very little proactive policing. The school resource officers was proactive. Core was proactive. We have the foot patrol. That's proactive. So is that the next to go? If we have to deploy more forces, more resources to the front lines, because that's a huge concern from. And I know there might be other areas where we can redeploy, but certainly the movement has been towards the reduction of proactive policing to support reactive policing. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. It's a great question. So we do map these things out. We have to remember that, when we look at mental health, for example, and homelessness, these issues didn't happen last year and manifest just in the last year or so. Mental health, for example, this happened, this started almost 30 years ago. It took us a long time to get here. I remember going to 850 Highbury, the London Psychiatric Hospital, when I was a uniform officer, fairly regularly. It was an inpatient facility, and there was a quick handoff when we had to go there with an individual who had been apprehended under the Mental Health Act, and that was closed down, and so we're living that now. So you know, I support housing, and I support everything we're doing through the Coast program, and all that. The wraparound services are an absolute requirement, is what we need to be doing. But to think we can turn this around in a year, or you know, by establishing some quick housing, took us 20 years to get here, 30 years to get here. So we do map this out, to your question. And there's really only 2 units that are that contain officers who we can redeploy. We can't really touch our investigative area because of the weapons and homicides last year. I mean, the very, very busy street crime and organized crime and things like that. So it leaves us with the foot patrol and traffic unit, for example. You know, these would be a last resort, first, let me say. And, you know, my phone will start ringing after this meeting because the foot patrol is sacred. I believe wholeheartedly in it. I used to work on the foot patrol. We know the value they add to the downtown, but it's not required by adequacy standards. And we had to, this past year, in 2021, redeploy some of those members. So I don't want to do that. It would be a last resort. But that's a group of officers who potentially could be redeployed. The traffic unit do amazing work, educational, they do proactive work, they do enforcement, and they investigate the fatalities that, again, last year, I'm not sure it was a record number, but it was pretty close. We know that every 3 years we do a public needs survey, and traffic's usually in the top 3. It's always been in the top 3, actually. So these are important to the community, they're important to us, but these are officers who we may have to redeploy at some point in time if we don't get relief elsewhere.
Just a follow up to the chief, Chair, if I could.
Yep.
So the foot patrol is funded through a special provincial funding grant, is it not?
You're correct, it is.
So we would lose that funding if we had to redeploy those members.
Conceivably, you would. You know, when we're triaging on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, we go where the bodies are, right? So if the foot patrol is working, I mean, they can be reassigned for a short duration, wouldn't affect funding, but any permanent reassignment of the foot patrol would affect funding. The foot patrol is funded by a provincial grant, which is never guaranteed. Obviously, it's year to year, 2 years at a time, whatever it is. So that could be at risk. Again, last resort. I don't want to go there, but it's a possibility.
So so where I'm going with this is that, you know, we're using antiquated funding formulas to fund new policing in 2022, and it's not working for us right now. We've had this discussion in the past where I feel very strongly that we're not serving the citizens of London adequately from a service level standpoint, and quite frankly, we're not serving our members and taking care of their well-being either. So I think we're losing on both fronts there. I've mentioned this in the past from a funding standpoint, from an overall funding standpoint for our budget, is that over the years, our budget, and I know policing costs as a dollar value have increased dramatically over the years in all municipalities. But when I went back and looked at the city budgets and our funding from the city over the last several years, as a percentage per capita, we haven't moved. We're not costing the citizens of London any more than we were 10 years ago, even 15 years ago. And quite frankly, you know, the city is known as having one of the lowest per capita policing costs of any city its size in Canada. And it's coming back to bite us now. And I think we need to be very proactive. I would support Megan's call for immediate action, because this is not going to get better. We don't want to be having this discussion when the chief says, you know, we've just pulled the foot patrol out of the downtown. and it might come to that. Resources are slim. We're not meeting adequate service standards as far as our collective agreement is concerned on a number of occasions, and it's not sustainable. And I wish I had a solution other than increasing the funding and increasing resources, but I don't. Right now, we are in need of more boots on the ground, and we don't have the budget for it. And so I think that I would urge this board to take immediate action as well. And I know there's a lot of complex issues in the city. There's a lot of demand for funding, but there's no other service in this city that's more important than providing a safe community for Londoners. And as employers, we have an obligation to make sure we take care of our employees. And so, again, I feel like a broken record. I'm not one that likes to spend money. I believe in lower taxes, not higher. But you know, we get what we pay for. And right now, we've got a police service. It's very stressed, and it's not providing value, in my view, for Londoners. So. I would urge my colleagues to move this up on the agenda as far as priority is concerned, and to develop a plan with our senior administration with regards to what is the adequate number of staffing that we need to have deployed so that we can get back to proactive policing and providing better service and response times to our citizens. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. So didn't hear a specific motion. We do have a motion that was moved by Jesse and seconded by Maureen to accept this report. So maybe we can do that first, and then if there's any other motions pursuant to that, we can move to that. So can I just get a vote in terms of accepting this report? All in favor? Excellent, and that is carried. Was there a motion? Megan, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like to table a motion that the Finance Committee work with the Police Administration and Chief and Deputy Chiefs to call an urgent meeting to look at where we are today and what the forecast is financially moving forward in light of the retirements that are coming and the increased demand placed on services at London Police Service.
Okay, that's moved by Ms. Walker, seconded by Mr. Lang. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, thank you. Very, very important discussion, and thanks to board members for speaking out on that issue. Next up, we have another report from Deputy Chief McIntyre, and that is the fourth quarter complaints against police report. Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So this is our year at a glance. We table this for you, really showing you a 5-year comparison. I have, through our professional standards branch, tweaked this report, not to keep giving you a different one, but to just, again, and with an intention of making it more transparent for you. Well, if you allow, I'll just kind of walk you through the first chart, the first table rather, that you see really just looks at investigations and complaint by year. The percent column is percent of the total. So you see complaints that are up. The ratios of those complaints, though, remain about the same. That's there to help you delineate that. But overall, the complaints are up. Primarily, they're OIPRD complaints. Local discussions is where we see the bulk of our complaints. If you flip over to the second page, you'll see, again, trending out OIPRD and Chiefs complaints. So what are our total? There are 178 total. And then you see the alleged misconduct. So what were the complaints about? So one of the ones that jumps off the page at me We still see high volume of discreditable, and that's incivility oftentimes. That's, you know, really the premise around incivility issues. We see neglect go up. Those are very synonymous to members of the public and what their complaint is. We've seen a year of struggle in our community. We've seen a year of struggle with our officers. The response times, the delay of those response times I spoke to in the third quarter. And when our officers do eventually arrive, it's a ridiculous amount of time later, not their fault at all. But then the member of the public is upset, and our officers spend a good 10, 15 minutes de-escalating that call because the member of the public, and rightfully so, is upset by the delay. And so then when the officer does arrive, there are many times we can't actually assist. And then they are angry with us because they expected us to take action on something that we can't. And so you'll see a lot of those complaints come in as a neglect. If I take you to the bottom table, this is what's interesting and just a reflection of our people in so many regards. So you see, again, it's chief and OIPRD. Now look at the resolutions. How are these resolved? 95 are screened out right away by the OIPRD. Unsubstantiated complaints determined by investigation, 51 of those. And then 37 right away are withdrawn. That's 84% of the complaints that come in are handled, are withdrawn, or unsubstantiated. You see that second row, informal resolution. And if you just allow me to speak to that just for a second, I often think in language withdrawn seems like it didn't happen. You know, when we speak, and it's often our investigators that in our professional standards branch that are making these calls, you know, the member of the public doesn't want to say, no, I'm not taking that back. But when there's time given, and our officers and our investigators in PSB spend enormous amounts of time with people, they just want to be heard. And at the end of the day, you know, they understand, okay, I can get my head around that now. The officer, that wasn't their intention. And okay, I realize that doesn't follow police procedure, or there was no ability for the police to act in those regards. And so then they become resolved. So you see that go up, but more because our investigators in professional standards are spending the time and then changing that language. We heard you, but let's talk this out, and you'll see more of those go in as informal resolutions, but really by the actions of our investigative team. Not that really anything has changed, just that to resolve something is far more palatable than to withdraw it. So I just wanted to kind of delineate what that means. At the end of the day, you know, you see resolutions as being 214. It's that at the end, if we look at what is just substantiated, again, we're into double decimal places, 0.03%. You know, our officers have had an enormous year, and it's not to say that they are always right, because I do believe they're responding to calls and their patience has run out. And I think we saw that this year. It is an inside out proposition. And this report really kind of follows nicely to what you just talked about. You know, our officers are human, although, you know, they do great work every day, and they stayed in the game for us to move through as we kind of come out, I hope, fingers crossed, the backside of this pandemic. But they're hurting. And I think you see that with the increasing complaints. The increase in complaints is up over the province. We do receive a report, I can tell you that. I just glanced at it briefly today. It came in from the Solgen's office. Local discussions is our page 3. Local discussions are way up. We see complaints. That's the member of the public either calling in to somebody and wanting to complain about the officer's actions, either on the phone. We see some complaints come in from that. We see, or they've come into police headquarters or reached an officer, a sergeant wanting to file a complaint about one of our officers. So you see that volume going up there. 22 of those right away, just in local discussions alone, 22 of those were service related. 20 of those were response times. If I flip you back to OIPRD and chief's complaints, you see at least 31. Now, a bulk of those service complaints are screened out by the OIPRD. They're absolutely frivolous and they don't hit the bar, but they're coded as such. But half of those, if I were to tell you the drill down in those, about half of them have something to do with response times. We used to get one a year, if that. So you're seeing the public, and rightfully so. And it's not just, you know, when you you know, when you know better, you do better, that saying. And so we love to hear the complaints. We love to drill down and look at that. But again, it's everything here. I would have told you in previous years, there's nothing noteworthy. There's nothing noteworthy. There's tons noteworthy. When I look at the type of conduct, it's neglect, unlawful or unnecessary exercise of authority. I just want to speak to that because this often kind of casts us in negative light, and it's not the case. Much of these come from Mental Health Act occurrences, and much of which is when the officer chooses to handcuff the member. So that is deemed to be a use of force, and it is for their safety and the officer's safety. And it's not violent, it's not excessive, it is just merely placing handcuffs on someone, and someone in a mental health crisis often cannot understand the need for that. We'll see a lot of those, if not all, I won't say all, but a great percentage of those are coming in within that. So you're seeing the influx of mental health and our officers responding to mental health. And despite the amazing work our post team does, unfortunately, there's still, obviously, police are still interacting with members in mental health crises. But then you look at, if I were just to give you the last page, local discussions, how are they resolved? They're all resolved. We do work through all of those. And you'll see, again, I would tell you that I would find neglects elevated there. But again, it's that delineation between incivility and what are you doing? And then when the police go, they're short on time. I don't think our members are really listening to people because there's 200 calls waiting to be serviced in the queue. So you're seeing them, okay, yep, okay, yep, what do you need to do? But that's not, and they're like, well, you showed up finally, but then you didn't even help me. Or that's the perception of the complainant. And so we're seeing that surface here. But in short, that's a long overview. But that's our year at a glance, and I just give that to the board for submission, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Any questions for the Deputy Chief? Ali.
Thank you, through the chair. So thank you for that information, Deputy Chief. When I look at the data and then I listen to what you just said, I can't help but feel that this is probably a microcosm of a larger experience that's probably being experienced across many facets of our community, right? We're in this context, we're talking about policing, but if you were to look at other public sector organizations or even private sector organizations, I would see that maybe even specifically over the last couple of years, obviously as we navigate our way through this pandemic, that there's heightened stressors, and we're all coping and dealing with things, differently. And obviously that's manifested out, and that might be part of the explanation in terms of that upwards trend in terms of the numbers there. So my question is this, in light of that, what, if anything, are we doing, should we be doing, is there been direction in terms of, calibrating kind of the force and the staff in terms of how to deal with these, I don't know if I could say unique circumstances, but these unique realities that we're dealing with maybe more in the last year or two or three than we have historically? Is there anything that, an approach that we're dealing with the police service there?
If I understand, or Chair through you, sorry. If I understand your question, what's our why here? Why are we seeing this shift? I would tell you right away, it's burnout. It is patience, it was the volume of calls. So when you have 200 calls sitting to be serviced, the citizens are not happy with that, but also our officers we're asking them, proverbially to move the sand off the beach. And so they're struggling. I think the community and our officers we've all been part of enormous struggle with COVID has taught us, right? That has had an impact. But could I just get you to clarify, am I on point with your question? I don't know if I've missed it.
Yeah, and thank you, through the chair. So forgive me if I wasn't clarifying the question part. It just was, okay, so we're cognizant and we're aware of all of these realities. We understand that this is a byproduct of probably many factors, whether we're talking about staffing or pandemic or all these other stressors on the force and the community at large. And in light of that, have we, are we advising, are we directing, is there anything that the force has done in terms of said, okay, police officers, because of these stressors that you're dealing with, your interactions with the community should take a different approach, or is it? And I don't want to veer into the operational aspect of things. It's just if we see the data and we see these trends, are we just saying, okay, well, it looks like there's an upward trend over the last couple of years, and we just move on and kind of keep doing the same thing, or do we cater the approach to the numbers and the data that we're seeing there in terms of how we interact with the public there?
It's such a great question, Chair, through you. So when we have trends, when we have increased uptake in complaints, or when there are pieces or marked kind of deficiencies in areas, that is shared back. So one, when you know better, you do better. We teach out. So right away, our professional standards branch, not too long ago, within the last few months, has been on all of the parades for frontline, speaking about that. We often see these complaints are primarily frontline officers, not always, but the bulk of them are, because they are our point people to the community. So one, it's education, it's sharing those deficiencies, it's sharing with them how they're being perceived. But I would still tell you then, what do we do? So, you can message, take your time, call it a time, service delivery, excellence in that service delivery. But when the radio keeps going off, calls to, anyone to clear for a code one, anyone to clear for a code one, anyone to clear, the officers will leave the person at the door to go. So then it's emergency driven. And then when you do that, you're leaving the citizen without a true resolution. So for me, it's resources. It's driven out of resources and the feeling that we, the police service, the administration, the board, have our people's backs. That we're not waiting for a complaint to come in. We've actually got their back and we're supporting them. And I think that's the shift that we're talking about today.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Could I get a mover to receive that report, the Complaints Against Police fourth quarter report? Moved by Ali, seconded by Jeff. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that carries. Next up, we have Deputy Chief McIntyre talking to us about the fourth quarter Crime Stoppers and Pursuit Statistics report. Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So these are a year at a glance for Crime Stoppers and for Pursuits. So the first 2 pages relate to Crime Stoppers. It's a quarterly report, and then you see the year at a glance, comparing 2017 forward to 2021. And overall, the tips for Crime Stoppers are down. As a result of that, we see all of the other markers go down, which I guess would make sense. The only one that I'll highlight for you, though, are weapons seized. We see that go up. So the complaints are down, but the number of weapons we're seizing through tips to Crime Stoppers, of course, is elevated. Very interesting. We see in our fourth quarter alone, if I just drill into the fourth quarter, we see that the tips received are higher than they were the previous year, that fourth quarter in the previous year. But at a glance, I would tell you that kind of means nothing. And I would look at really the takeaway is that the tips are down. What's the why there on the tips down? I would say lockdowns. I would say crime reporting is down. I would say just our citizens calling that in is down. But without knowing and having more analytics behind the Crime Stoppers side, it's hard for me to really share that. I can take this opportunity to tell the public that any tipster is eligible for a cash reward up to $2,000. I think that's important to understand, and that it's anonymous. And so that vehicle is still there. So, hopefully we'll see that, be more, robust moving forward. Pursuits, the trend of pursuits is that they are down. And this is what we want to see out of a risk management perspective. We had 7 in total last year. Which is lower. And so I think over the time we're doing extensive training on this right now. It is an area of high risk for the organization. We see the dollar amount so when we're into pursuits, oftentimes more than not, we're damaging our vehicles. There's obviously costs associated to that. So you see those numbers all are down or lower when we look at the 5-year trend. So aside from that, I just want to highlight on my report, I did star one for you that has not been reviewed. So I'll report that on the next quarter just to give you an accurate total there. But aside from those reports, you'll see a definition page for pursuits. I think oftentimes that's confusing, but we leave that in very much like the complaint report. But those are my recommendation that the board receive those 2 reports, and any questions be happy to take.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any questions? Can I get a mover to receive the fourth quarter Crime Stoppers and Pursuit Statistics Report? Moved by the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that is carried. Next, Deputy Chief Betts, you'll be walking us through the collection of identifying information in certain circumstances. This is also a mandatory report, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, this is likely to be a very short walk because there is not really anything to report. Once again, for the 3rd year in a row, we've had 0 regulated interactions that would meet the definition of the regulation here. So as a result of 0 regulated interactions, there are 0 complaints associated to regulated interactions, which we're required to report on as well. Really, I have nothing more to report other than what's there, and that is 0. So subject to any questions, that is the substance of the report.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Any questions for the Deputy Chief? Seeing none, can I get someone to move the acceptance of that report? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that is carried as well. So the next item we have is an update on the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. The Anti-Racism Advisory Panel has not met since December 6th. However, we are going to be choosing a date shortly, and I am pleased to announce that Mr. Tabar is going to be joining that panel as a member. So we look forward to having him on the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. And obviously, when we meet again, I will provide a further report to the board. Similarly, with respect to the Mental Health and Addictions Advisory Panel, they have not met since November 12th. But Ms. Walker has very graciously also agreed and was quite excited about joining that board with her background and experience. So they will be having a new member as well, which I think will inject some much needed energy into that advisory panel. So we're quite happy. Both panels are going to have some new members, and hopefully both will be able to continue the good work that they're doing. Those are my updates on those. I don't think, Jen, we need to do a motion to accept updates. Nope. So that's it. There was no new business. So I just need to announce that the next public London Police Services Board meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee as well as the board are both occurring on February 17th, so about a month from now. And most likely, I'm going to say 99% likely, it will be virtual, but obviously we'll let everyone know prior to that date. And that is today's board meeting. I just need a motion to adjourn. And that is moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you in about a month's time.